Hello, everybody. Rick, the retired Texan here. It's been a long time since I've done a video, and I've had a lot of other things going on, and really haven't had anything I wanted to say. But it's been a good summer. It's just been too damn hot. I I am actually feeding hay to my cows right now, and I've never fed hay to my cows in the summertime before, and I don't have too many theoretically for the amount of land that I've got them on. It's just not raining where I live. It hasn't rained hardly at all in a very long time. It's just crazy. That's why I'm wearing this stupid shirt. It's just miserable hot here in Texas, especially where I live. But anyway, thought I'd jump on here and do a video. I've been thinking about my career, and I just thought I would share my thoughts about what went on in my career, as far as how working for a really big company and working for some small companies, how that went for me, and the pros and cons of those scenarios. You young people might be at some point contemplating: do you want to work for a small company? Do you want to work for a big old company? And so maybe some of my comments will help you somehow, or maybe you should just ignore everything I say. I've told y'all before, I just do these videos so my grandkids can look back on them someday and see what their old pop was about. But I make them public just in case somebody might get some kind of kick out of them, either a little bit of information, or those of you who like to stay pissed off at people all the time, maybe I'll put stuff on here so y'all can get mad or whatever. But anyway, I worked in the same industry my whole adult life. When I was a senior in high school, I went to work for this big old company, working in the warehouse after school. And right after I graduated, I went full time, and I worked for this big old company for 28 years. Big old publicly held company in the consumer packaged goods industry, beverages to be a little bit more specific. Doesn't really matter which one. But I worked there 28 years. And then I went to work for a small company for 11 years, maybe a little over 11 years. Same industry, beverage industry, a little private owned brand. And this guy it was an old brand, but it was a small company, big brand in Texas. Most of you around the country would have never heard of it, but it was big around here. And this guy bought it from this family. This guy and a couple of investors bought it from this family, and it was already a good brand. And then we turned it into something really special in those 11 years. And then I finished my last 5 years working for a little micro company, a little tiny company, still in the soft drink business, but it was a little craft local Dallas-Fort Worth company, a little private owned place with 12 or 13 employees, something like that. So let's talk about the big old company I worked for 28 years first. Started off part-time, then I became a delivery guy. That like to kill me. I was young and stout and tough, and thank God I had all those attributes, because it was hard work, real hard. And but I was good at it, and I worked hard, and And I made, in over those 28 years, man, my career excelled way beyond what I ever thought it would. I mean, I went way further up the ladder than I would have ever thought I would. I didn't have a college degree or anything, so I ended up making good money and with a pretty big job before I got all of it I could stand and finally quit. But so my memories of that big company, most of my good memories from that big old company all evolved around the people that I worked with. People I worked, some of them that I worked for, and a whole lot of them I worked with, and a whole bunch of them that worked under me. Those are my good memories of that company. Most of my good memories are just the human interactions, not working there. When I first went to work there, it was privately owned, and I remember it being a very pleasurable place to be then. It was a big company, but it was private owned. And then it got, not too many years later, it got bought out by this big old publicly owned entity. And then from that point forward, really all it was good for me was making money. I could sit here and give it a whole lot of thought, and I could give you some more good things about it. But I'm just kind of giving you my top line, very impressionable memories. It wasn't all bad. I'm not trying to say it was, but working for that big old company, other than the people, was I just don't have a lot of good memories about it. The company, and it seems like these big old, huge international, publicly owned entities, you know, you really, no matter how far up the ladder you get, you really just feel like a social security number over at payroll. I mean, you have some good human interactions there, of course, but you don't really, but I didn't really feel emotionally invested in the company. I felt like I worked there, and even though I did a great job, according to them, I did a great job. You still just don't feel, everything feels artificial. You don't really feel like an entrepreneur. You just feel like somebody that's working in this big conglomeration, and if they lost you tomorrow, they wouldn't matter much. They replace you in 5 minutes, and a lot of the employees would miss you for a little while, but you're just gone, and it's just like running cattle in and out of somewhere. It's just you just don't feel emotionally, passionately connected to a place like that, a big old place like that. It just feels so artificial, and you can make good money for your family, and you can make a lot of friendships and all that. But it just wasn't a pleasurable place to be. You just knew that they were constantly reorganizing the company, And, you know, they were always claiming that every big reorg was to make the company more efficient and putting us in position so we could do a better job and all that. And some of that's probably true. But at the end of the day, they were constantly shuffling the deck on how the company was structured. And it was obvious that they were constantly doing that just so they could save money and figure out a way to redefine you and your title, and constantly trying to figure. It just seemed like they were constantly trying to come up with some kind of structure so that they could just pay you a little less and work you a little harder. And the further up the ladder you get in a situation like that, the more obvious it becomes to you that that's really what's going on. I mean, they package it in a way that makes you think that it's not about that. It's about just making the company bigger and better and all that. And some of that's true, but when you get up the ladder and you start to realize how, you know, they're trying to do, they're really just trying to figure out how to work everybody's ass a little harder and pay them a little less, and you know, get some of the older people out of there that are making too much, and you know, constantly trying to shuffle the deck to meet demographic goals and all that kind of stuff. And so all that was just aggravating as hell, and it was constantly happening. It seemed like once every 18 to 24 months, something like that was going on. So everybody was always worried about whether or not the next restructure was either going to put them on the street or cut their pay or work them harder than they already were working. So there was always the threat of that rolling around, you know. And I know a lot of you would say, well, if you do a good job, you don't have to worry about stuff like that. Well, that's not the case. Sorry. A lot of good people got their pay cut, and a lot of good people got their job title changed, and a lot of good people had to work a lot harder for the same amount of money or less, and all of that was just miserable. And so the threat of that happening, it seemed like every 18 to 24 months, was just awful. And everybody worked in a silo. You know, a big old company like that chops every little responsibility into a piece, into a silo. And, you know, everybody's got different goals. Even though we're all supposedly working towards the same end, it doesn't feel that way because everybody's got their own little silo that they're working in. And all those little silos are constantly trying to justify their existence. And all those little silos that are all supposed to be working towards this common goal are actually, you know, having a pissing match all the time about whose ideas are the best, and how what you're doing in your silo negatively affects what somebody else is doing over here in their silo. And then next thing you know, everybody forgets about, you know, we're all supposed to be working towards this goal over here, instead of just constantly trying to justify our existence by coming up with a bunch of stuff that really didn't help us achieve our goals. There was always just a bunch of minutia that we were always having to deal with that was just a bunch of distractions that people come up with to justify their existence. And so that was a constant in that world that you got sick of. And then there was the proverbial 200 to 300 email a day from people that worked in all these various silos that were constantly posturing to survive the next restructure, or constantly politically posturing so that they could get the next promotion, or so there was always somebody who wanted to make sure they were being heard. So there was just tons and tons and tons of worthless emails put out to these distribution lists that included tons of people on the topic that didn't need to hear about it. And then there was that group of people who always felt like they needed to reply to everybody on the distribution list so that they could be heard and seen, so that they could be more high profile and get their promotions and justify their existence. And so it just seemed like there was a lot of stuff going on in that big company that really didn't help achieve the ultimate goals. It was just distractions and politics and a bunch of crap, and a bunch of money that was being spent on positions we didn't need, honestly, and not near enough money being spent on the people that were out there actually out on the street interacting with the customer that was really moving the needle. There wasn't near enough money spent on those positions, but there was tons of money being spent on all the other people sitting in their little cubicles trying to come up with the next latest and greatest spreadsheet that we all need to fill out 3 times a week. And from that standpoint, that environment was just freaking miserable. It just was miserable. So those are the things I remember about working for that big old publicly held entity. And I appreciate the good money that I made there in that, what I considered to be a pretty miserable culture. It seemed like a bunch of people just constantly posturing and being a little bit dishonest and disingenuous. I remember we got a new CEO one time, and the CEO before him was pretty dang good. The CEO before him started from the bottom of the ladder and worked his way all the way to the top, and so he had a very strong appreciation for those positions that really and truly move the needle. Well, he eventually retired, and he was replaced by the CFO. The CFO became the CEO. Well, I'm going to tell you something, folks. If you don't know this, when the head bean counter becomes the CEO, then it just becomes a smoke and mirrors numbers game, because finance people love numbers. And I remember the first thing that this new CEO said. He said, during my reign as CEO, the theme is going to be put your people first, put your employees first. That was the smoke screen he put out there. And then the first big decision he made that happened under his leadership was to cut the 401k match in half. It was being matched 50 cents on a dollar up to a certain percentage of your pay. And then